basically fly as much as possible and walk as little as possible, and just use Mother Nature's wind and thermic lift to be able to carry you from one point to the next. Sometimes you're flying as few as 13, kilometers. Sometimes you're flying as many as 140 kilometers in a single flight.
This is the Adventure Sports Podcast, where we talk to athletes, adventurers, and business owners from around the world of adventure sports. Whether you're climbing Mount Everest, starting a bike shop, or getting up off your couch to take your kids hiking for the first time, we want you to have the motivation and inspiration you need to chase that next adventure. The Adventure Sports Podcast is brought to you by Camp Crate, the leaders in fully planned self-guided backpacking adventures, as well as backpacking gear rental. You can check them out at campcrate.net. So this is one of the more unique adventures I've ever heard of. So we went kind of long on this interview, so I won't take too long. Benjamin Jordan is a serial adventurer. He's done a lot. Highly recommend you check out his website and his photography on Instagram or on his website. It's benjaminjordan.com, and then social media, Benjamin Jordan Adventure. And he has paraglided 1,200 kilometers along the Canadian Rockies, which is just, look at pictures of this. It's unbelievable. So we talk all about his sport, which is basically touring with a paraglider, and really, really awesome stuff. But let's get into it. I won't take too long. Today's sponsors are Athletic Brewing. They are also funding our adventure grant. But let me first tell you, non-alcoholic beer, really good stuff. I've been enjoying some myself. And they are, like I said, funding the adventure grant, which there's only 5 days left. It's open till June 1st. We've had a lot of incredible applicants, and I can't wait to introduce some of those stories. But please sign up for that. Go to our website, the website, or in the show notes, there's a link. Check it out. Also, CS Instant Coffee, makers of 100% Arabica coffee in 100% compostable packaging. You can get a discount with them in the show notes as well. And then we have the Nomadic. It's a subscription box for outdoor enthusiasts. Also, we are giving away 3 of those. Sign up. Link is in the show notes once again. All right, let's get into it. And thanks for joining us today. It's going to be an awesome Monday. All right, everybody, welcome to the show. Today we have and a really cool story, and I'm really excited to get into the details because I don't know the answers to any of the questions I'm going to ask. And this is a guy who is doing things really different. Is in the paragliding world, he's doing things that have never been done, really challenging things. Many call impossible. And recently, among tons of other trips, he recently flew a paraglider 1,200 kilometers along the southern portion of the Canadian Rockies, something that's never been done before, and that is just freaking awesome. And his name is Benjamin Jordan. Benjamin, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's awesome,
man. I don't even know where to start, but you flew from the American border, pretty much, of the Canadian Rockies, all the way up to Prince George, British Columbia.
Totally, yeah. It was something that I just felt really, really passionate about. I started in Montana on foot. You're not allowed to fly across the border. And I walked across the border and, got my stamp and hiked up the first hill I could find, which was about a kilometer north of the border, up a cut block. And I, over 52 insane days, made my way all the way to Prince George, which is the capital of northern British Columbia. So I basically flew the Rocky Spine, crossing the divide several times, going across Banff National Park, which you're not allowed to land in, and Jasper National Park, which is the first time anyone's ever flown across Jasper, to get all the way there. And I did it without using any fossil fuels. Just by using Mother Nature and the gifts that she brings in terms of wind and thermics, which we can get into.
Wow. No, that is What an adventure, man. I mean, I might make a lot of people mad in saying this, but dude, the Canadian Rockies are my favorite mountain range in the entire world. We're based in Colorado, and I tell you what, they're better than anything in the States to me, as far as epicness and beauty and just dramatic. They're the most beautiful mountains. And so to fly over them, I can't even imagine how gorgeous that was.
It's like every minute, it's like someone has not just turned the page, they've like started a whole new book. You just enter a whole new valley system, and it's just like, okay, what's going to happen now? What do I have to contend with? If I have to make an emergency landing, where am I going to land? If, where the thermal's going to be, what's going on? How am I going to cross this? What's the valley wind doing? What's the laminar wind doing? What's going on here? Can I get out of here alive? And so every 5 or 10 minutes, you're dealing with that exact same set of questions over the course of sometimes 5-6 hours, to complete a flight. And then at the end of that whole thing, you got to think about, well, where am I actually going to land? Because you got to land at some point. And ideally, you're landing on top of a mountain, but that can be sketchy at best. So, I mean, I'm trying not to go on tangents here, but there's a lot of things I'd love to share with you.
We actually had a paraglider on recently who climbs up volcanoes and then flies off. But it's very like, he has a big area to fly down. He's not super, maybe let's say precise in where he needs to land, because he flies down to these meadows at the bottom of the volcanoes, and it's huge open areas. And then he might have a few hour walk to his car if he didn't, time it right or whatever. But you don't really have that luxury when you're trying to land on mountain peaks,
Yeah, no, this is called Vol-Bivouac paragliding. They don't even have a word for it in English. That's how rare this sport is. That's how fringe it is. It's a French word that means fly camp, literally, Vol-Bivouac. And basically the idea is, in its purest sense, to carry everything that you need on your back, whether that's your paraglider or your food, or your tent, whatever you want to bring, whatever luxuries you want, whatever necessities you have, and to basically fly as much as possible and walk as little as possible, and just use Mother Nature's wind and thermic lift to be able to carry you from one point to the next. Sometimes you're flying as few as 13, kilometers. Sometimes you're flying as many as 140 kilometers in a single flight. And ideally landing on a mountain that you can camp on, find water on, and then be able to launch from the following day. Now, the catch is that sometimes you can't fly the following day because this is paragliding. And so you have to do what they call para-waiting. But most people para-wait. Most people para-wait for a few hours, and if it's not good, they just, hop in their car and they go home and they watch Netflix. If you are on a mountaintop and you landed there, you may not even be able to hike off of that mountain if you wanted to. You may be on a mountaintop that no one's actually stepped on before, just to set the record straight, I'm a paraglider. I like hiking. I'm not a mountaineer. So when it comes to certain types of terrain, I have no business there. So I'll often be in a situation where I've landed on a mountain and I can't actually get off that mountain without flying. But that could take me up to a week if, a storm is coming through or certain, gust fronts are coming through. And so I'll be stuck there and, usually up to 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers away from even a gas station as far as being able to replenish my food. So it gets pretty hairy. And I like your definition of adventure that you used on your last podcast anyway, because that's exactly what it is. It's constantly thrusting myself into the most precarious, unknown situations, but at the same time, like never feeling more alive.
Dude, I honestly can't even imagine the feeling of being stuck on a peak and then just you have your wing out and just take off like a bird. I can't imagine how awesome that would feel. Never done it. It sounds, especially there in Banff or near Banff.
Imagine just kind of flying around, taking your pick of like 4 mountains that you think, trying to identify which one would be the safest to land on. So things I'm considering are, okay, what's the wind doing in that area? Is that going to be, hazardous? Is it going to create turbulence? Because if you have turbulence, and you're low to the ground, that's the most dangerous thing that can happen in paragliding, because your wing can deflate and you can drop and then you can sustain serious injury. So that's the big thing that you have to worry about, is turbulence. And then you want to look at, well, if I do have a bit of a rough landing, maybe I want to pick a snow patch that I can just kind of plow into in a worst case scenario. So then you're looking at things like that. And then all of a sudden you're down there, you're in the snow patch, you're folding up your glider, and you're like, all right, I gotta, fortunately if there's snow, then that's your solution for water. But sometimes you didn't land on snow, and sometimes you have to, walk around and sort of discover this new planet, if you will, and figure out, well, is there water here? Can I walk down if I need to? What else is there here? Where's a good spot to camp? And then at the end of all that is, where can I relaunch from? You can't just launch from anywhere. You have to launch into wind or into a breeze. So sometimes the best place to launch from, maybe there's a little meadowy side of the mountain, you can't launch from there because there's always, cycles coming down that mountain because of it's on the lee side, where the wind is dropping over the back. So you have to launch from, maybe you have to hike up even higher, closer to the summit, and find like a snow cap where you can spread your lines out without getting them caught on all the rocks. They get caught on the rocks and they break, and that's a problem because they break literally as you're launching. And so there's all these considerations, but I would liken it to landing on a new planet and kind of being there all alone and having to figure out what's going on here. How am I going to survive here over the next 12 hours or 36 hours or 72 hours or whatever it is.
How long were you on peaks for?
I was on peaks up to 7 days.
Oh my gosh! And what do you? I mean, was it a moment that did you have food for that? I mean, what was that experience like, that 7-day portion?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's like pretty nuts, because let me just give you a slight tangent here.
Go for it, man. Just make whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah. I feel like this will make it more relatable, and it answers a lot of questions, I think, for people to think of, why would this guy do this? So, when I was a kid, I grew up in the city, didn't have access to a lot of adventure. My mom, thank goodness, she sent me to a camp for a couple weeks every summer. And then at this camp, this one year I was 15, and they decided that an exercise would be that they would take us out without saying a word. We got up at like 4 a.m, and they put us into this little roped off section of forest. And we had some instructions. You had to write a letter to yourself. You had to not leave your roped off area. There was no information about how long you were going to be there for. So I'm in my little roped off area. I've never been by myself. I grew up in the city again. So there's constantly stimulation. There's constantly people to observe you, judge you, whatever. And here I am for the first time in my life at 15 years old without a soul around me. And the craziest thing happened. After about probably 4 or 5 hours, literally started going insane. I literally felt my mind slipping away. I was inventing new languages. I was like tripping. I couldn't eat any of my food because I literally thought I would be stuck there for days. And after 12 hours, they came and they got us and they let us come back. And I was so relieved. But the degree of relief that I felt literally felt like as if someone had taken a gun to my head and then removed it from my head. And it was that relief that struck me. And when I was struck so much by that relief, I thought to myself, wait a second, I was in a dire place, but I wasn't in a dire place. And so what's going on in my mind such that I can't be alone for, 12 hours without completely losing my mind? What's going on? What is this fatal flaw that I have? I'm a human being. I ought to be able to contend with that kind of alone time. So since that time, I'm 38 now. I was 15 then. My whole life has been about trying to push that and heal that, whatever that is. And so it started with, a 1-day bike trip, and then a 3-day bike trip, and then, traveling to New Zealand by myself. And I've sort of upped it and upped it and upped it. And now I am at the absolute peak of being able to just not lose my shit when I'm alone for an extended period. So now skip to last summer, and I'm sitting on some of these mountains for up to 7 days waiting for storms, or in our case, we had a lot of smoke up here to clear out so that I could fly on. And what I do is I meditate, I play ukulele, I play music, I fly and hike with a ukulele, and I pass hours and hours every day with that. And I explore, I hike, I try to map out the mountain, I try to figure out, where I am exactly, try to learn about the new kinds of animals that live on the mountain, try to learn the language of the rodents. Every mountain seems to have a new kind of rodent, which is pretty cool. And yeah, just kind of learn about nature and get more in touch with nature and feel like I am not alone. I am one with a greater system, and that it's okay.
I can't even imagine. I mean, I've said that a few times. This is just a mind-blowing adventure to me. I've seen those mountains. I've been in them, and to just have the I'm scared to death when I'm on the bike or hiking on some of those trails just because of the sheer, sometimes exposure. But you're on a mountain for a week in a storm with this flying fabric, playing a ukulele, meditating. It sounds like a fairy tale. It sounds like it's amazing. That's unbelievable.
Well, there's so many things that that I am picking up on that I want to touch on. So one thing that I want to just throw out there, because again, I feel like it's relatable. A lot of people hear about paragliding and they hear about what I'm doing and this and that, and they think, wow, that's crazy. I could never do that. This and that. Like, isn't that so scary? So one thing that I want to share is that okay, paragliding is scary for me when I'm sitting on the ground, like right now, thinking about paragliding. But the moment I start paragliding, I'm so consumed by what it is that I'm doing that I have lost the capacity to fear. I literally have no more brain cycles left to generate the emotions of fear for what I'm doing. So I agree with you and I relate to you that it sounds crazy and it sounds like mystical and unbelievable, but in the moment of it, it is so believable, and you have to put all of yourself into it. You have to be so present to it, which is, I think, what I like about it, that it doesn't actually feel scary. You're literally just doing. So there's that element, and that I feel can apply to anything in life, which is awesome and has helped me a whole lot over the last 14, 15 years that I've been doing this. And then at the same time, I can also relate to being terrified of the idea of having to hike or cycle along this terrain because you are incredibly exposed. I'm not on that terrain. I'm over that terrain. And so my greatest concern is having to land in that terrain. I don't,
that actually makes a ton of sense. Yeah. Because when you're up there and things are peaceful, I guess it is this moment of just surreal peace, probably, until you have to reconnect with that land. Until
you have to think about it. And so the risk in paragliding is touching the ground because you don't know where your next invisible elevator is going to be or if it even exists. And so you fly into an area and you commit to a valley or to a region, and you know that if you don't find that invisible elevator to get you back up, above the ridge so you can fly into the next valley, then you might end up having to land there and you may not be able to find your way out. And that is probably my greatest fear, is having to come in really hard, maybe get stuck in a tree, have to land on a scree slope, even twisting an ankle in a situation like that, you're so remote, can be absolutely devastating. So I relate to you in terms of not wanting to end up in a hiking situation and being so exposed. I feel like every time I cross a valley that I kind of got a get out of jail free card, and that I realize that I'm pushing something, but that as long as I believe that I can do it, I feel like I can do it.
So was there a moment where, you said that's your biggest fear? Were there any moments where you landed and thought, oh crap, I'm stuck?
I gotta say, I wish I could. Okay. In the past, I have had the experience of landing in trees, for instance, not in these kinds of scenarios, in less precarious scenarios, fortunately, where I was able to get some help too. On these large trips, I've done 2 so far. This one that we're talking about, as well as 2 years earlier, I flew from Vancouver to Calgary. So I flew from west to east across all of the mountains of southern Canada, southwestern Canada. I have been very, very fortunate in terms of that I'm always finding, even if it gets precarious, I'm always finding that invisible elevator, that thermal, and getting back up and being able to make it back to a place that is, relatively safe, somewhere that I can hike out of, somewhere that I can keep going. Worst case scenario, I'm usually landing on like a shoulder of a highway or something like that, and then I'm able to make it. But in order to do that, you have to cross sometimes up here stretches of 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers, where there is no road, where there is no field, where there is no highway. And you can't land in that section. And if you do, it could go really bad. So I would say that there's lots of times when I start to get low and I start to get concerned and I get into a windy spot, a bad spot. And I can spend up to 2 hours just struggling in that area, just hoping that something about the meteorology will change. Maybe the sun will wrap around, it'll get a bit warmer, and there'll be a nice big thermal that will come up and not be so wind affected. When there's a lot of wind, it kind of blows the thermals out like I like to think of birthday candles on a cake that they can't really form because they're just subject to so much wind. Sometimes the wind will literally have to die down in order for me to be able to continue because the headwind is too strong, and that means that my ground speed is too low to be able to make a crossing. So I'll have to just literally wait there until later in the day when the wind hopefully dies down so that I can make that crossing. But yeah, I mean, it's usually the first couple hours of a flight feel the most committed, and then you kind of almost deplete your adrenals and you stop feeling like, oh, I'm afraid, and you stop looking at where you might land, and you just start looking at where you want to go.
I mean, it sounds incredibly stressful, especially for 52 days of the emotional toll that it takes on you to be so careful and have to constantly think of all those factors all the time. Well, the biggest thing I'd say the most emotional thing is actually the food situation, because I like food. I think a lot of people like a lot of people like food. I like to eat food. I am fortunate to, be in a situation in a country where there's a lot of food for me, and I'm not a small guy either. So, I have to limit my food intake on these trips to what I can carry, and that looks like basically 2,000 calories a day. That's 1,500 from peanut butter and another 500 from instant noodles. And that's all I get. That's a lot of peanut butter and instant noodles.
It's a lot of peanut butter. And when you're hungry, believe it or not, I mean, you've probably been in the situation many times. Like that is just like gourmet. But when I get stressed out and when I'm bored, those things make me want to eat. That's just my reaction. And I can't eat, because I literally have a finite amount of food. So I have to just like ration my spoonfuls of peanut butter and, realize that like I might be stuck there for a week. And if I go nuts on it today, then I'm actually going to end up in a situation where I'm feeling really, really, really hungry. And those have been the most stressful for me. And on this last trip, I actually got to a point where I had depleted my 12 days. That's how much I can carry of food. I had to learn to hunt. I'm a vegetarian. I have been for, 20 years. And I had to learn how to set traps and skin and cook basically marmots to stay alive, or at least not to suffer in a horrible way. I was on a mountain where I could not get down. I was stuck in the thickest smoke that I've ever seen. It was a record wildfire season here in British Columbia.
Where was this that you were stuck?
I was stuck in the North Rocky Mountain Trench, just west of Mount Robson, which is the highest mountain in the Canadian.
Gosh, but it was a great view. Oh, well, aside from the snow.
No, it wasn't a great view. I was probably only 10K from Mount Robson, and I couldn't see a thing. I couldn't see the valley floor. I couldn't even see the peak of the mountain that I was on the shoulder of. So my visibility was limited to about 100 meters, and I wouldn't even really call that visibility. It was just that you could see a vague outline in the middle of the day, no less. You could pretty much look straight at the sun. It was just a crimson red all throughout the day. It was cold, despite the fact that it was August, and that was how it was day in and day out. So the videos that I captured, the vlogs, really show me becoming kind of emaciated and kind of blue.
Athletic Brewing is pioneering non-alcoholic craft beer. Yeah, I said non-alcoholic craft beer. And there's a number of reasons you might want to do that, whether you're training for an event, which a lot of our listeners are, or, if you're babysitting and don't want to be drunk in case something happens. I mean, stuff happens, but you still want to sit down and enjoy the game and have a beer. This is an incredible option for a full-flavored, full-bodied beer. Each can is only 50 to 70 calories, with IPA, golden ales, stouts, and tons of seasonal offerings. Athletic Brewing is a great option if you want that craft brewery taste, but not deal with the effects of alcohol itself. If you'd like to save 15% on your first order, go to athleticbrewing.com and use the code ADVENTURE at checkout. Not to mention the breathing isn't ideal.
Oh, that's the thing. And my voice, although I didn't realize it at the time, it just, it sounded like I was, a lifetime chain smoker. Like it was,
oh gosh,
it was brutal. and I had to deal with the emotions of killing these animals and eating them. And, and I guess even that became just kind of par for the course after a couple days. But
after being a vegetarian so long, did that affect you, upset you, your body, your stomach? I mean, that's a harsh transition.
I kind of feel bad saying this, but like I never felt I never felt more alive. It may be because I went from feeling incredibly hungry to incredibly satisfied. But I had a very positive experience eating those marmots and squirrels, and I suppose my rationale was that it was more for political reasons. My choice as a teenager, and in this moment here, it was more of a wild and natural situation that I did feel quite comfortable with. I wouldn't have judged anyone for participating in that kind of activity. I had always felt that I couldn't do that because my body wasn't set up to process that kind of food. But in fact it was, and it did very well, in that circumstance.
Wow. That is, and how long were you stuck there on that particular area?
On that one mountain, I didn't arrive there with a full food supply. I probably only had about 5 days when I first got there, but I was there for 7 days. Okay.
So that was the 7-day stretch.
There was actually 3 7-day stretches.
Oh my God, man! Come on.
Yeah,
Jeez.
And a bunch of like 4 days too. So yeah, there was quite a few, maybe even 4, but not. Sorry, I shouldn't say 7 without access to amenities. One of them was when I was stuck in the town of Jasper. So I had, a library, my goodness, and a grocery store there.
Right.
But yeah, that was the time. That was the one time that I literally didn't leave that mountain, and I just had to stay there and wait there for a week, which was definitely my maximum so far.
How good did it feel to take off after that?
Oh man, I was, and it wasn't even a good day. It was still smoky. But I got above that smoke layer. And so I felt, I don't even know there's no word for that. Like you're literally floating on top of like a blanket of smoke now in this clear blue, and you haven't seen blue for all that time. And you're just kind of coasting along and unfortunately having to glide down into the smoke and then trying to get back up out of the smoke. But yeah, there's no words to describe that feeling. Like it literally felt like being released from prison. I was so grateful, and it wasn't even a long flight. It was the kind of flight that I would have typically been bummed because of the smoke. The sun was not able to heat the earth, so those invisible elevators weren't activated properly, and I only made it about 30 kilometers that day, and had to bushwhack up another mountain. But I was so grateful just to have gotten to the valley floor. I even got to buy some more peanut butter at a gas station. So I was just like on cloud 9, as you can imagine.
What the heck? I mean, I'm sure it was like when the 15-year-old experience just times 50 of being released from that perimeter in the woods you had to sit. And I mean, could you imagine describing to the people in the gas station what you just went through?
It's funny because, I show up there and they, and I don't, and I would probably do the same if I were them first. So I'll say that, but they judge me, because I walk in there dirty as can be, disheveled as can be. I haven't had a bath in 40 days at this point.
Right.
And they look me up and down, and they actually won't even talk to me. Usually they'll just keep having their mundane conversation about the weather and the smoke to whoever else they've been talking to for the last 2 hours. And, that's my judgment, I guess. But, it's interesting because they'll, when I do show up to the register and they'll say something to me. So you've been hiking, because there's a lot of hiking happening in that area. And I'll say, well, kind of, I'm paragliding from Montana to Prince George. And they're like, oh, and don't even really bat an eyelash. And I get myself, and they're like, so where are you going to hike? And I'm like, well, I'm paragliding, I'm doing this thing. And it's kind of like, I guess it's like that story of how the native people, didn't see Captain Cook's ships on the horizon because they didn't believe that something like that could happen.
Right. And
so they got caught off guard. So in this situation, the person is not really able to fathom what it is that's going on here, or what's on my back, but they'll keep asking me questions like, that looks like a big tent. I'm like, well, actually it's a aircraft, and I'm a pilot, and I'm doing this thing, and it will be a record, and it's kind of a big deal. And I'm trying not to make a big deal about it, but like, I'm so proud of it.
Right.
And so it's an interesting experience that I have with people, because they usually judge me as being this hobo in that moment. And I mean, I guess there's really not much more to say about it.
Yeah. Well, if you told them, I just sat on this mountaintop for a week playing ukulele and meditating, and I ate a bunch of marmot, they probably wouldn't believe you.
No, they don't, and that's okay. I don't blame them. It's pretty crazy, and I feel very, very lucky to be able to be pushing the limits in a sport like this. So.
And that's what it is, man. I mean, someone's sitting at a gas station all day checking people in and out for gas and candy bars. For someone to come in and say they're flying 1,200 kilometers across one of the most rugged mountain ranges in the continent, that is, they can't process that. I mean, I've done bike trips that were really long, and I'd tell people where I started, where I'm going.
Yeah.
And they just brush it off like I told them, hi, how you doing? I can't imagine with a sport that's even more kind of out of the norm than that, with what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way for them to be able to process that. Just like I wouldn't be able to process someone, I don't know, doing something that's so out of my world. I wouldn't even know where to start with a conversation.
Yeah, like an astronaut, like just like
exactly.
Was up. It was like, I just came back from Mars. I'm feeling a bit tired. Like where do you start? So yeah, I get it. And but yeah, that's Vol-Bivouac paragliding, Mason.
My goodness, man. So you make it to Prince George, and I mean, was there anyone waiting for you? Was it really, I don't know, anticlimactic, or how was it for you?
I feel like it was a pretty solid Hollywood ending. I ended up making it a little bit past the town of McBride, and at that point, it gets really committed, because you have this really wide Rocky Mountain trench, and the highway is on the west side of the valley, but you'd have to fly the east side. And if you landed on the east side, you'd be, landing in a cut block and having several days just to get to the highway, and then another about 4 days to get to Prince George, with nowhere else to be able to relaunch, just because of the configuration of the landscape. The mountains start to get a little bit smaller as you moved west towards Prince George, and there's literally no, like, McBride is your last opportunity to get up into the mountains without, complete bushwhacking for days on end. And so it's kind of a no man's land beyond that point. So I stationed in McBride on McBride Peak for a total of about 5 days. And I waited for the smoke to clear, and it never cleared. And I could see in the forecast that it was gonna stick around for another couple weeks. And on top of that, we were dealing with storms. So given that it was getting towards the end of August, it was probably about August 23rd at that point, I made the very, very hard choice to complete my journey on foot. So up until this point, I had barely walked the entire way. I'd flown about 1,000 kilometers. And at this point, I had to suck it up and realize that if I wanted to finish this thing, I was going to have to be on foot. So I walked the last 214 kilometers from McBride to Prince George over 4 days on the highway. And my girlfriend was waiting for me there. And she got the whole group of people at the Tim Hortons there in Prince George to applaud as I entered. So it actually did feel pretty. It did feel pretty empowering. But that was the reality, is that I was not able to fly past McBride. So the last 200K or so I had to do on foot, which was, I think, a really great way to end it, because, I could have probably flown that in a day on a good day. But I really had to, put my head down, and I think I was walking about 15 hours a day, something like that, and just meditate on how grateful I was to have been able to accomplish what I did accomplish, and to reflect on the uniqueness of that, because it's so easy to just start taking things for granted, like, yeah, I'm this guy, I fly around, I've got support from these businesses to just live my dream and just, drop out of the sky wherever I want and launch back into the sky wherever I want. And, it's probably the greatest thing that even I take for granted inside of that I work with her on a daily basis, is I take Mother Nature for granted, because she's always there. She's always dependable, and is always ready to give me what I need. And then in a circumstance like that, where she needs to burn for a month, I don't know what to do. And it helps me put things into focus and to remember that she's the boss and I'm just a little marmot myself. And that if she's telling me that it's not time to fly, then I need to listen, and I need to not complain about that, but actually just focus on how grateful I am for those, month and a half of great flying that I did have leading up until that point,
Right. The ending and beginning of this trip essentially are set by you. But really we are invited by Mother Nature to experience this. And if she needs to do something else, then there's nothing we can do about it. And, I think you'd agree. I don't love when people say I conquered this mountain or I conquered this feat, but I witnessed this. I survived this, because we're being invited into these places that are, man, they're amazing. They're the only planet we know that have features like this, and it's just unbelievable to get to witness it. And totally. I totally agree with you. Incredibly, incredibly grateful, even if a trip doesn't turn out how I hoped, but that I was at least out there, even for a moment, to experience any of this is just consider myself lucky.
Totally, dude. Yeah, it's a treat, and the reality is, I could have gotten pounded into the ground on day one, or not even gotten off the hill, it could have twisted an ankle, could have anything could happen, but none of that stuff did happen. And so it's just a really good practice for me just to express my gratitude in those moments of strife, of, blisters popping, like pounding rain, getting soaked, just like head to toe with like semi trucks blasting past me, causing these massive wakes, and just being like, yep, no, I'm still alive. I'm still here. I can still walk. I have some peanut butter in my bag. I'm okay.
I have some peanut butter and a ukulele. There's nothing I can't do. Man, that's so funny. Now, so speaking of which, would you mind, because we don't talk to tons of paragliders, because I'll be honest, in the pictures you look kind of like a backpacker. It looks a little different, but if someone didn't know, they would just assume you're backpacking. What kind of things are you carrying that might be unique to your sport? Obviously the wing, but right. Like what else?
I guess not a whole lot, other than the wing. The important thing to consider is that when you're looking at my backpack, which may look big to some, it may look small to others. It's a little bit wonky, and it doesn't look like it has a lot of support. Um, the thing that's in it is the paraglider. That takes up probably 80% of the space in that bag.
I believe it.
And I think it's probably like only like a 60-liter kind of a bag, let's say. So it's not huge, and it's kind of puffy. And so inside of that, I've also got a harness, which doesn't take up a ton of room. And a few instruments that I use for aviation, but you could use them for other things like a GPS, and a phone with topographical maps. But that's just kind of like hiking stuff, really. I'm just doing it in the sky, and I have different maps maybe. And then you have basically all your basic camping stuff, and I just go for the most ultralight stuff that I can get. So I carry a ultralight 2-person tent. It's the Big Agnes Fly Creek Ultralight 2, which I'm not supported by them, but I highly recommend because it's done.
Colorado company too. Woo woo.
Yeah, it's very good, and I felt it was reasonable what they asked for it. So that's something that I would replace if I needed to. I got one of those Enlightened Equipment, also a U.S. company, quilts. It's a down quilt. So it's super minimalistic kind of sleeping bag. It goes down to sub-zero, and I think it weighs half a kilogram. It's similar to the Western Mountaineering, just a fair bit less expensive. I have a jet boil, which I try not to use because I can't replace the fuel very easily. So I usually just make little fires under the thing, and that tends to work really well, even though it kind of creates a lot of carbon buildup that I have to clean off. I usually just make a fire and put the jet boil pot on that. But I have the fuel canister and the thing for that. And then I carry a fair bit of photography and film equipment because that's my job. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm a professional photographer. And so I'm actually just finishing a feature-length documentary, a film about this project. And I've already published the official photo documentary on my website. And so I'm constantly documenting what's going on, vlogs, setting up cameras on tripods, walking past the camera, doing some action. In flight, I've got cameras on stabilizers. I've got cameras on strings attached to the outside of my paraglider, so they're flying along beside me like a co-pilot, if you will. Which you'll see in some of the photographs and the film. And so that's a big part of what I carry. So I've got solar panels. I've got a little battery pack, extra stuff. I use all the Goal Zero stuff. I find that their stuff's solid. And then just some basic camera stuff, some little HD cam and some GoPro stuff, and that stabilizer, as I mentioned, selfie stick, And then, like first aid, that kind of stuff, repair things, needle, thread, Band-Aids, duct tape, super glue, and those are all super crucial, by the way, like life or death crucial. And
with the wing, or with
just with everything, okay. With everything. Like if I break a line, for instance, on my paraglider, like I got a few replacement lines, that's just standard thin Dyneema, whatever lines, but I need to sew with a needle and thread. I need to sew the thing closed after I replace it to the right length, in order to do a line replacement in a pinch. If I realize I'm about to go launch and I didn't realize that I broke a line somehow on my last flight, that I have to replace that line immediately. So things like that, or if my pack tears apart, sometimes I'm overloading my pack, and I've had an instance where my pack was breaking apart at one of the points where the webbing was contacting. So then I'll have to, maybe cut a piece of my shirt as a patch, and then use the needle and thread, over an hour, to create a patch where I've reinforced the bag, those kinds of things, and then of course there's food, and I try to make a lot of space for food. So I've got this compartment in my harness where my rule is that nothing other than food can go in there. That's so that I don't shortchange myself on how much food I can bring, so that I don't carry more accessories than can fit into the rest of the harness. Even if I only have a day's worth of food, the only thing that goes into that pocket is food. That way I can fill that pocket up with food. And if I if I am leaving home or leaving a gas station or wherever I've last gotten my peanut butter and noodles, I can pack up to 12 days worth of food into that little pack. And that, I think it is about 10 liters of space, and that will last me 12 days. And I put all the peanut butter, into Ziploc bags so that, they get smaller as time goes past and they're a bit more malleable in the pack.
That makes sense. Yeah. Wow. That's literally all you have for food.
Well, I find that it's, on top of being economical, it's some of the most calorically dense stuff that you can get, and it's the stuff that you can get anywhere. So I could step it up a notch and go with like ghee, or butter, but that's not going to be fun. Plus, you can't find ghee everywhere. And if, I know one guy, he does mayonnaise, but geez, it's one thing to have peanut butter with your coffee in the morning, but imagine having a spoonful of mayonnaise whenever you got hungry. Like, that's just gross. So as far as like calories for weight and space, peanut butter is just a godsend, to us here. I feel it's tasty. It gives you a ton of energy. It's, not just shitty calories. And, the noodles aren't great, but still calorically dense for weight. And the way that they fill up my belly, it really helps me get a good night's sleep. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Unreal. I'm looking through your photo album of this trip, and yeah, it makes sense now why these pictures are so good. You do this for a living, because this is the most beautiful scenery I've ever seen. It's unreal. It's unbelievable. And to know that you flew over it and that you land on the ground, that you really exist in two different worlds on these trips. The world of the birds, and then the world of us terrestrial animals that have to walk around the ground. I can't imagine what a day flying is like to land and then have to walk, somewhere. It's just such a trip. Yeah, tripping. You just must be tripping all the time.
Well, I kind of am, and it's my great honor to be able to put this kind of stuff into a film, because I try to document those moments of extreme excitement. For instance, right after I land, I usually have something to say to the camera, and the camera's already running because it's recording the landing, and I'll say something. And whenever I land, whatever I say, I'm like, that's genius when I look at it after, because it's like, I can't recreate that. I can't fake that. I couldn't have written that, whatever it is. And I love to be able to share that kind of excitement, because literally what's happening is you're flying, and then all of a sudden you think you have a plan, and then your plans change, and you're now looking at landing somewhere you actually don't know where you are, and you're going to have to figure out how to get back up to a mountain or be able to hike to get food somewhere. And, it's just vulnerability to its max. And I feel that vulnerability and love are one and the same thing. They're just interchangeable kind of emotions and words. And so I would say that literally what I'm doing is I'm just flying into love, and I'm landing into love. And that's why when I'm speaking to my video camera after I've landed, that I'm getting something that is so precious, is that it's my deepest expression of love. And that's really, I think, what it is in a nutshell for me, is that I get to feel that deep love, as long as I'm on these kinds of journeys like this.
I want to take a second to tell you about The Nomadic. It's a subscription box curated for outdoor enthusiasts by outdoor enthusiasts. So each month you get a hand-picked selection of the latest and greatest outdoor gear that's been trip tested and approved by the Nomadic product team, which is made up of guides, athletes, and bona fide adventurers. They partner with brands like Mountainsmith, Gearaid, Sea-Line, Mizzou, Empowered, RX Bar, and a lot more. This month's theme is Relax to the Max. So one item inside is an exclusive hammock by Lawson Hammocks, an award-winning hammock maker who's been voted #1 by Backpacker and Outside Magazine. So order by May 14th to get this box. So get quality gear by brands you trust delivered right to your doorstep monthly. Learn more at thenomadic.com/ASP. This episode is also sponsored by CS Instant Coffee, 100% Arabica coffee with compostable packaging. And you can find them at csinstant.coffee and use adventure at checkout for 20% off. Wow, man, that is just awesome. And now I know you're a filmmaker, photographer, and you have lots of projects, and you document them really well. What else is going on, and what's in the future for you? And is there anything that's kind of in correlation or parallel to this that you're doing that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Sure. Well, I have a kind of, would it benefit you to, or your listeners to hear about like why I'm at where I'm at and like where I've come from in terms of.
If you have the time, I would love to hear that.
I have the time, and I want to be succinct. There's so much to say.
Talk, man. We do long form interview. We don't keep things to a script. I mean, some episodes are 30 minutes, some are an hour and a half. It all depends on the guest. So here's a little background.
I grew up in the city of Toronto. I didn't go to college. I decided that I wanted to be a fashion photographer, a fashion and advertising photographer, because that was like the image of the coolest guy I could ever imagine being.
Really?
And I became that guy. I was shooting for businesses like L'Oreal and Nike and all sorts of things. Lots of recording artists I worked with, and I did that for about 6 years. And I got to a place where, I was doing it. It was getting better. I was, earning more every year, saving more every year. And I started looking at like the prospects of like having to, buy a house, and realized that like, even if I worked as hard as I was working, like in the city of Toronto, no less, that was going to be something that I was going to have to keep doing exactly what I was doing for the next like 30 years. And I remember asking a friend of mine and sort of saying like, dude, like I kind of feel stuck. Like I'm kind of living my dream, but at the same time, I feel like I'm kind of stuck in my dream, because that just doesn't seem exciting to me to have to repeat this script every day for the next 30 years. And he basically just said to me, and I respect this guy very much, and I respect his opinion very much, but he basically just said to me, that's how it is, Ben. Like that's, unless you want to, deviate from society, you pretty much have to do that. And that was so depressing for me. And that's really when everything changed. And at the time, I had been, I had just learned to paraglide, and I had wanted to do a big project with paragliding and photography, because I felt like, well, paragliding I love and photography I love. Let me put them together. I'm going to paraglide across Canada. That was my big sort of goal that I had set for myself that was totally unrealistic at the time. But I was organizing these skateboarding events and longboarding specifically in Toronto. It was still quite new at the time. And I got an email from these guys that wanted me to organize a fundraising event for them in Toronto as they longboarded across Canada from east to west. And I first said, sure, yeah, breast cancer, totally. I'll support you guys. When are you coming through? We'll throw a big event. We'll raise a bunch of money. And I went to sleep that night, and I was thinking about what they're going to do. And I was like, damn it, I want to do that. And I wrote them the next day, and I said, like, look, you don't know me from Adam, but you need my photography. You need my web development skills. Please accept me as part of your team. I'll cover all of my costs. Just, I want to skateboard with you. I want to document this. I want to make this a big thing. And fortunately they said yes, because I'd already given the notice on my apartment. I literally had 2 months to the day of their departure, which is the amount of notice you have to give for leave an apartment in Toronto. And so I'd given my notice, and I didn't know these guys at all. But I got on a plane. I gave away all of my stuff. I kept my skateboard, my guitar, my computer, my camera, and I got on a plane to Halifax. And the next day we started skateboarding across Canada. And it took us 6 months. And we raised a ton of money for breast cancer. It was an amazing experience. And 2 years later, I flew a paraglider back across Canada, a powered paraglider, I should specify, from Tofino, which is the westmost point of southern Canada, to St. John's. which is the eastmost point of southern Canada, Newfoundland. And it was a 10,000 kilometer world record. And that just sent me spiraling into a incredible life of adventure. And since then, I've traveled about half the year every year. So we're talking for about 15 years all over the world. And I've been making documentaries about adventures that I have in Canada as well as abroad. Something I'm very passionate about is helping people learn to paraglide in countries where they would not be able to afford to learn to paraglide just because of the economics involved. So I started by going to Malawi because no one had ever paraglided there before, not a local or a foreigner. Back in 2011, I taught the first guy there to fly a paraglider, and I made a story about that. And it's called The Boy Who Flies. It was very successful. It was in the Banff Mountain Film Festival and Kendall and all those other big ones. And that did very well. And it allowed me to take a bunch of the proceeds from that film and put it back into that project. So I've started a project in Malawi called the School of Dreams, which is a place where people who want to learn to fly, despite being from what is considered to be the poorest country in the world, if they're willing to put in the work, that I will help them obtain the quality instruction and the quality used equipment that they need in order to make that dream real. So that's happening. It's called the School of Dreams. theschoolofdreams.org is the website for that particular project. People are invited to get involved either as pilots or non-pilots. There's lots going on, which I won't get into right now, in terms of the community involvement. And people can get involved as volunteers immediately if they want to. So there was this big shift that happened in my life, and essentially what I realized is that I was tired of waking up and going to sleep in the same bed every single day. That as good as my life was, the fact that I knew what it was going to look like was horribly unsatisfying for me. And now I don't live in a swank apartment in downtown Toronto. I live in a school bus in rural British Columbia on a farm. But I do that because it gives me the ability to do whatever it is that my heart sings that it wants to do. And what it wants to do is it wants to have adventures. So the fact that I'm talking to you right now about all of this means that I chose the right path.
Wow. So you're in the town of Nelson, correct?
Yeah, I live outside of Nelson. I actually live in the Slocan Valley, just south of the Great Slocan Lake. So it's about an hour outside of town. Everything takes a while because the roads are so windy out here. You have to go. But yeah, as the crow flies, it's only about 20 clicks from Nelson, but by road it's about 100.
Why that area?
Well, when I rode my skateboard across Canada, right before I did that, when I was still living in Toronto, the thing with Toronto was that I realized that adulting was going to be a lot of work. I was 25 at the time, and I was looking at the whole house car thing, trying to figure out how I was going to play that out in my life. And I realized, okay, that's going to be a lot of work. But if I'm going to do that, I better be doing that in an area where I absolutely want to live for the rest of my life. And I realized that I would have rather worked, some sort of intense labor job that I didn't really love that much if it meant going back to the place that I loved the most in the whole world. And so that skateboarding journey, basically crawling across Canada on a skateboard, allowed me the opportunity to really sample the entire country. Of course, not the north, but the entire southern part of the country. And, we stayed in every town, every city as we came across. And I found myself gravitating towards British Columbia. And once I got out to BC, I moved to Vancouver and I went on a motorcycle trip, got my first vehicle, which was a motorbike. And I went on a motorbike trip the next summer and I found the West Kootenays. First, I found Nelson. And when I got off the bike, I was struck by how nice everyone was. It was like a small town, but everyone was really, really nice. Like you asked for directions to, a coffee shop that you were recommended. And all of a sudden this person is recommending some other thing to you and they're doing it in a really friendly capacity. And I hadn't experienced that in city life. I'd always thought I had to live in a city because I was born in a city and I thought anything less than a city was just lesser than. But I realized that when there's less people around, people care about each other a bit more. And I was really attracted to the vibe of Nelson at that time. So I moved there the following year. And once I got out there, I kind of started to realize, well, there's even more remote areas around here where people are even nicer. And then you can also be, more in tune with Mother Nature. So I live right on a river out here that I can drink out of. And I don't get to see a lot of people, which can be tough at times, but that's the thing that I'm working on, right? So that's fine. And it allows me to put all of my time and energy into my projects and my film projects. So I live in the West Kootenays, and I live here because I feel that not only is it beautiful, not only is it pristine, but I found here the nicest people, I want to say on the planet, but if not on the planet, then at least in this country.
I see a little town out there called New Denver.
Yeah, New Denver is just north of where I live. I fly from Idaho Peak a lot, which is just above New Denver there. New Denver is an old mining community. This whole area is like kind of Canada's version of the gold rush. New Denver, Silverton, all those areas, they were basically all developed to be able to make people, rich back in the early 1900s. And then they turned into ghost towns. And then, a lot of draft dodgers moved up here during the war down in the Vietnam War. And that's a lot of who's up here and kind of repopulated this area. Wow. So it's got a real hippie kind of vibe, which I definitely resonate with. Grow your own food, build your own house, try to, consume a little bit less, do a little bit harder, but, feel more satisfied at the end of the day.
I love it, man. Yeah. I'm from I live in Old Denver, big city. And yeah, it is not that area. It's a big city, man. It's getting bigger by the day. And yeah, I need to find a little place like you found and get away from all this craziness.
Well, you're not far. I've driven from there back into Utah before on some pretty remote roads there that I thought were pretty special. So I think you're in a pretty amazing place. But yeah, for sure, that's a huge city. Man.
So in Canada, is it, here in the States, it's the West is kind of where the adventure is, the big landscapes, the massive mountains, the wilderness, the wild, the adventure kind of is out west. Is that the same with Canada? I've never been able to ask somebody that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is.
People talk about that. Like when I get out of college, I'm going out west. I'm going to BC.
Yeah, everybody. Yeah. Wow. A lot of people move to either Vancouver or Calgary as their starting points because, most people live in cities. So they move to cities because that's where they feel confident that they can find work and stuff. And that's cool. And then from there, they usually, not usually, but they can be like me and they can get a bit more rural because they realize, well, I don't want to commute to the mountains. I want to live in the mountains, right? And then they maybe sacrifice a little bit in terms of employment in order to really live right in the heart of the environment that they would otherwise be traveling to on the weekends. But there's something for everyone out there.
Worthy sacrifice.
Well, I don't really miss the hustle so much. But I mean, there's good things about both sides of it. It just depends on where you're at in your life and what you want, what's important to you. So for me, just getting out in, the morning and just being able to, pee wherever I want and howl at the moon and not worry about whether I'm upsetting a neighbor or whatever. For me, that's the most important. When it's a sunny day, I'll get out with my banjo and I'll just be playing at top volume, singing, at the top of my lungs, not worrying about whether I sound good or not, because I just feel awesome. I just whatever makes me feel good is what I want to be doing.
That is so funny you say that, man. I was just frustrated right before getting on with you because I've been drinking a lot of coffee this morning and I had to pee. And I was like, I just want to not have to aim every time I got to go and just go outside and aim towards a bush and just go for it.
I like to practice aiming, but I like to try to write like communications for my girlfriend and, like,
oh, how romantic.
A heart or, something like that. Yeah. I try.
Man. A true romantic right there. Holy cow. Oh, special girl. Special girl. But that's funny, man. Wow. So any big adventures on the horizon for you? I'm just kind of resting right now.
Yeah, I don't want to it's a great question because it allows me to talk about why I don't talk about the adventures on the horizon. And that is because, unlike, a lot of other athletes that I respect that, really promote their adventures and they get people to follow them with live tracking and all this kind of stuff. My feeling is that I wrestle with my ego. I don't want my ego to come up. It doesn't serve me. And if I'm in a situation where I'm, looking at a high risk operation, such as what we've just talked about today, I feel a certain kind of pressure. If I give my word to something, then in order for my word to be good, I have to act. And I want to make sure that I'm only doing things because I think that they're a good idea in that moment, not because I said I was going to do it and that people are kind of expecting me to do it and that they might judge me as not being a man of my word if I don't. And I don't want to have to walk around creating a bunch of excuses for myself, like, oh, it wasn't the right day or it wasn't the right year or this or that. So for me, it guarantees to me that I'm not going to put myself in a dangerous situation that is something other than what I wanted to put myself in for my own reasons apart from my ego if I don't have other people watching me. So for instance, only other than my sponsors, only one person knew that I was doing this, or I guess two, my girlfriend and the guy that was watching my tracker, my InReach tracker, because I needed to have circumstances like, for instance, when I was flying out of Golden and I had to fly from Golden to Saskatchewan River crossing over the Great Divide, over the Continental Divide. That's a big deal. But that's done less than once a year. It's probably only been done 5 times in all history. And I needed to make sure that was the right day and the right time to do it. And that I was confident that I could make it over that 50K of very unforgiving wilderness. And on top of that, cross all the way across Banff, because it would be illegal for me to land in Banff. And so when I flew away from Golden, after waiting for 4 days of high wind to pass when I was in Golden, I got out of Golden. I'm 20 kilometers north of Golden. I'm above the Blaeberry Valley, and I'm looking at Howes Pass, and I'm looking at the Continental Divide, and I have to commit. And I got this feeling in my stomach, and I just turned there under the clouds for about half an hour, and I realized it was undeniable, and I could not do it. It was not the day. There was just too many variables that weren't perfect, and I felt that the risk was too high. Now, had I had people looking at what I was doing, if I felt that there was 1,000 people or 2,000 people from all around the world watching my tracker, excited, kind of cheering me on, no question I would have done it. No question. Because just that feeling of encouragement that I would have felt, that I would have created in my own mind, would have been enough to make me choose to do it. But the reality is, it would not have been safe. It would not have been safe, and I needed to fly back to Golden and suck it up and wait 3 more days of shitty wind to be able to make that crossing happen. And so circumstances like that are the ones that I want to protect myself inside of. And so that's why I don't talk about it. And it keeps me really safe, and it relieves a lot of stress too.
Yeah, it's definitely a wise decision especially with the sports. So like you said, with so many variables that aren't easy to control, like, hiking, it's a good chance you're going to be able to hike every day. They're really what's going to go wrong is something with your body. But what you're doing, oh gosh, there's lots of, needs to be a lot of redundancy when it comes to safety, and you don't want any false sense of encouragement or pressure that shouldn't be there, so that's wise.
Exactly. And so if it's not the year for something, then it's not the year. And if I have to inform my sponsors like, hey, I'm going to do this next year or something like that, I can deal with that. But I can't deal with, the comments and the ideas and the opinions of thousands of people now that are interested in kind of like watching me and trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. I have to keep it top secret. because otherwise I get very, very uncomfortable. But I am really excited about what I feel is next and what I know is next, which is that I'm releasing a film. And this film, I wasn't sure how it was going to turn out basically until a few weeks ago, but I'm kind of closing in on the final thing, doing some of the sound and the color now. And I am so excited about the film. It's just called The Endless Chain, which is also the name of the expedition. The Endless Chain is that 25-kilometer long ridge in Jasper National Park that no one had ever flown over top of before.
Oh, yeah.
And so I made the whole expedition around the Endless Chain and living this dream. This was also the dream of somebody. It was the dream of many people, but it was the dream of a friend of mine named Stuart. And Stuart, unfortunately, he'd been hang gliding since the 70s, and he was out in Jasper back in the 70s, and he wanted to fly this ridge back in the 70s, but it was illegal to fly in Jasper National Park or any national park in North America for that matter, hang gliders or paragliders, ever since they were invented. But one park opened its doors up on a trial basis, and that was Jasper. And so Jasper 4 years ago allowed people to come paraglide, but still no one goes there and paraglides. And so most of it is still unflown. No one's ever flown across the whole thing, and no one had ever flown across the Endless Chain. So Stuart's dream was still this really palpable thing for me. And when he told me about it, I realized, like, you know what? We're going to do that, and we're going to do that as a team. And so I brought Stuart on as like my weather guru. Sorry, I think I forgot to mention this major plot point here, that Stuart became a quadriplegic in 2011 after a bad paragliding accident. And so for me, I felt this really powerful emotion around that, like, he would have otherwise been able to achieve this. He's a very skilled pilot, but now he couldn't, and that someone needed to. And so I teamed up with him, and I had him watching my inReach and sending me weather updates every day because I was outside of cell phone reception. So he was working with me in collaboration in order to make this thing happen. And we put this, like, he and I are now this incredible story that is very emotional and very energizing of this team of people, one guy behind his computer and one guy on the ground and in the sky working together to make this thing finally happen. And so that's what the Endless Chain film is about. And that's what I'm excited about. Yeah.
I'm very excited to check this thing out.
The website for it will be theendlesschain.com. I'm going to launch it in the next couple of weeks, but it'll be up by the time that this airs.
Wonderful, man. I remember I biked past that chain on I guess it's on the Icefield Parkway.
It is, yeah.
I remember riding past that ridge, and it was it's something to behold. That is for sure.
Yeah, totally. So, and you can even see pictures if you go to my website. You can see pictures of flying over top of it. It was kind of, yeah. I can't even believe that it actually happened. Like, that's just,
unbelievable.
So yeah,
man, I'm extremely excited about this and about this interview, and I appreciate you taking some time to talk to us about it in detail. And honestly, I could talk to you another 2 days.
Yeah, well,
there's not a whole lot of that I know about this sport.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about anything else, I'll be very, very happy to make time. It's my passion and it's my privilege to be here and be able to share this kind of message with everyone and this kind of information with everyone.
Wow. That's fantastic. Well, I tell you what, we'd love to have you on again at some point in the future and maybe talk about, because you've done a few different, quite a few different adventures. I mean, skateboarding across Canada, holy cow, that's just a totally different world in itself. So we should get you on again and talk about another one.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Or if you want to talk about stuff over in Africa, that's a whole other can of worms.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Let's do this again.
Cool.
All right. Well, Benjamin, congratulations. What an adventure. Super stoked for your film. Let us know if we can help in any way.
Thank you so much, Mason.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Keep doing what you're doing. This is fantastic.
All right, buddy.
All right, man.
Talk to you later.
Yes, sir. All right, see ya.
Hey.
Bye. Well, first of all, thank you so much for listening to this episode. It really means the world to us that you want to spend your time with us. If you'd like to help us further, please just leave us a review on iTunes, share us on social media, tell your friends about us. You can become a patron, a supporter of the show for $5 a month at patreon.com/Adventure Sports Podcast. And if you know somebody that would make a good guest, reach out. We're always looking for good adventure and outdoor stories. And lastly, thank you to our sponsors, whose messages follow right now. Athletic Brewing makes the best non-alcoholic craft beer. Go to their website at athleticbrewing.com and use the code in our show notes to save 15% on your first order. The Nomadic, the first outdoor subscription box that helps you go on more adventures with the latest gear by delivering themed monthly boxes with innovative products and an outdoor challenge to match. Learn more at thenomadic.com/Adventure Sports Podcast. After all this adventure talk, if you're needing some gear yourself, but you need some advice before buying, go to backpacktribe.com, where you can ask questions to the owners who have experience with all the gear, as well as all of it for sale right there on their website.